Oh no, all of my dynamite.
All my TNT starring Mr. T and a lady. Property of Ted Turner.
Ted's dead, baby. I think he burned in a fire.
Gentlemen, let's broaden our minds.
Are they in the proper approach pattern for today?
Negative.
Hold the weapons! Now! Charge the lightning field!
Yes, let us all take a ride on that eternal mustache. Hey everybody, welcome back to Dispatch Ajax. This is Jake.
Hey, everybody.
That's a Skip guy. Today, we are talking about something that a lot of geek culture tends to despise in a weird way. Probably from getting picked last on the t-ball field or, getting hit with a dodgeball or whatnot.
Hitting that home run touchdown on the t-ball field.
You won the sports balls, all of you. You're an all-star. Get your game on. Go play.
Don't. Just stop. Just stop. We will not have Guy Fieri in this house, otherwise known as the lead singer of Smash Mouth.
But I feel like I'm walking on the sun. Guy Fieri, go.
So, we would like to state the case that being interested in sports and following sports does not, negate your geek card. Even if you despise sports, which is totally fine. Jake and I did have this discussion a long time ago about why we as hardcore geeks would like sports in general. And then we came to a realization while watching a Chiefs game one paltry Sunday afternoon in Kirksville, Missouri, that all we were doing was watching a drama play out, the good guys versus the bad guys in brightly colored spandex performing superhuman feats. And then it all became crystal clear that we were just watching comic books in live action. Which I think is also the appeal of, a lot of wrestling.
Oh, most certainly.
So,
it's these larger-than-life uber athletes doing a pantomime play that we can get behind, the good guys and the bad guys, and feel camaraderie with. Essentially, sports, whether you're a geek or not, it's a vital and vivacious part of all human society. One would assume that since the creation of the ball, there's been a need for sport in some form or fashion.
Oh, I thought you were going to say speed.
Yes, there's been a need also for quaaludes, a strong need for the methem.
Wow. Laudanum, yeah, there's been a big call for that.
Yeah, no, I've been lost in the desert on a horse with no name, just with a bottle of laudanum. But essentially, sports provide a generally safer outlet for our primordial hunter-prey interactions, our base tendency for violence, the dopamine rush of combat and winning, our narrative expression of good versus evil, and our shared communal bonds and tribalism. Sports is as intrinsic to humanity as is art, or food, or sex. And being a geek is no different. We cheer for our sports teams the same way we cheer for Superman versus Lex Luthor. Or
Superman versus Lex Luger.
Oh, man. I don't know. The torture rack might put him out, and he has that bionic elbow. If you start mentioning wrestling, you're in for a world of hurt.
I believe that. I'm sure there's a tagline that goes along with that. This is the New World Order, after all.
I would make wrestling references, but you wouldn't get them, so.
No, I'd go over my head.
Now, before we get to the geeky part of this, which is the far future, we need to take a look back at the past. In our history, there's been an evolution of sport. You have the gladiatorial games of the Romans or the medieval knighting affairs are the most obvious examples of these bloody affairs of brutality, meant to break men as much as it is to defeat them. But there have been many others that you may not know of. Something like pancration. The first historical game happened in the 33rd Olympics, which is about 648 BC, but it probably existed long before then. And pancration was kind of like this combo of mixed martial arts and wrestling. The idea was each fighter was supposed to bring their opponent as close to death without killing them as humanly possible. Because if you killed them, you automatically lost.
It's called edging.
Yes. Yeah.
It's called death edging.
Yeah, man, I was trying to figure out some way to, like, really spin that, but it wasn't working. So we're going to go with death edging. There's also something like Calcio Storico, also known as historic football. This originated in the Middle Ages, possibly a revival of the Roman ball game Harpastum, but the rules were formally established in the 1580s. The rules say it should be gentlemen from 18 years of age to 45, beautiful and vigorous, of gallant bearing and good rapport. Essentially, the players take the play field, which is about the same size as a football pitch or a soccer field, as you might say in America. And the idea is to score as many goals, more than their opponent, by any means necessary. Sucker punches and kicks to the head are forbidden. Butting, punching, tripping, wrestling, choking are all fair game. Again, this is kind of like soccer meets rugby. As my dogs battle upstairs.
Death.
A more recent example would have been Bo Taushi. It's essentially Japanese pole topping.
Don't you have to pay extra for that? There's specific clubs for that, I think.
You can go to the pole topping or the cuddle bar. Which one? You only have time for one.
The cuttlefish bar.
The whole idea is kind of a capture the flag, but with upright poles. And it's this huge teams of 75 men versus other 75 men. And you have to try and attack and defend each other's poles at the same time.
It's like Battle Royale.
Similar, but without like the weapons or the killing. But it does get pretty violent. This possibly started in the 1940s with the Japanese military, but nobody really knows when it began.
You ever watch the Ip Man movies?
Yes.
There's that one that's set during World War II where the Japanese come in and they make them fight for rice. Mm-hmm. I could imagine that would be possibly an origin for that.
Yeah. You know. Yeah, and then Mike Tyson comes in and knocks them all out.
That is true.
In 1500 BC, the Olmecs started the Mesoamerican ball game. You may have heard of this before. When the Olmecs started, it was more of a prestigious event. Essentially, only the socially upper class could play. And then it passed on to the Mayans, who tweaked it, and they put stories behind it where they played this ball game. It was humans versus the Lords of the Underworld, which is Xibalba.
Cool.
Yeah. And they used the game as a stand-in for warfare or settling territory disputes or hereditary issues or even to foretell the future.
See, that's the greatest purpose of sports. Let's say your dog, for instance, wants to play. They're mimicking survival and predatory skills because that's how they learn and that's how they keep them sharp just in case they, need to survive. It's a survival technique passed down through evolution, right? So humans are more complex, but it's not any different. It's the same idea. We're using strategy just like we would on the battlefield. We're using brute force, physical stamina,
and learned skill.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And why not make that a replacement for war? That's essentially what play is a stand-in for combat.
Yeah, no, it was a very evolved way to look at the sport.
Hell yeah.
To take humanity forward.
And we'll talk about a movie that does that very well later on.
There's a few movies, actually.
But you're right.
Then you have the Aztecs who came after the Mayans, and they were like, we're going to finalize the sport. The Mayans also used prisoners to play, but the Aztecs decided to start decapitating, sacrificing the losing players.
Oh, that's good.
They amped it up, turned it to 11, and made it a truly dangerous and bloody affair.
It's kind of like The Longest Yard, but then you die afterward.
Yeah, or if you happen to get as many goals, they just cut your head off and sacrifice you to the Lords of the Underworld.
Well, they were going to anyway, so.
And essentially, a Mesoamerican ball game, it's kind of like a volleyball, racquetball, but you use your hips, mostly.
What?
Yeah.
I know about this weird soccer one they had, or the, what's that game with the giant hooks?
The hooks?
It's kind of like lacrosse, but they're these giant...
Highlight.
There you go. Cool.
Yeah. Highlight. It actually comes from Basque, which is in...
Oh, really?
España. The sport is played worldwide, but especially in Spain and France, and in Latin American countries. If you get hit with one of those balls, it'll F you right up.
Tonight on SportsCenter, we've got your highlights.
I think similar to highlight in one way, at least. It has large wooden things you put on your hands, in a way.
Okay. I'm with you.
So polo has changed much over the years. Now it is more an effete fancy Englishman game. It's the 4 men on ponies. But in the ancient Persian matches, it would be upwards of 200 mounted units galloping and swinging mallets at each other. That's back from the 7th century BC, and for hundreds of years. Again, it was a way of training mounted fighting. Similar to that is buzkashi.
Bukkake?
Oh, you wish.
You have to be a good shot.
This is where Turk tribes trained cavalry with mounted riders attempting to place headless goats or calves carcasses into a goal. This started with Asian nomadic tribes and spread between the 10th and 15th centuries. From what I can understand, just about anything goes. And when you have 2,000-pound racehorse that you're running into each other, bad things might occur.
Who's to say?
But not as bad as what was happening in ancient Egypt, where you'd have the fisherman joust.
Gortons versus Van de Kamp to the death.
Who's going to win their summer camp this year?
Both of them have sort of Candyman hooks.
These guys, it'd be teams on small boats, and they'd use their poles. They would swing hardcore on each other and try and mess each other up. And once you got into the water, if you could swim, bully for you, but the chance that all the blood in the water has probably attracted crocodiles and hippopotamuses to kill you.
They dangerous.
Yeah, very dangerous. Much like, now I don't know exactly how to say this, but I think it's Natlikir? It is an ancient game of Vikings in Iceland, similar to Irish hurling. They used sticks to hit a ball into a goal thing, but full body contact was allowed. And the bigger you were, the more intimidating you could be, was the better. So usually the strongest and toughest survived. This is the game they played in the movie The Northman, if you saw that.
I have not yet.
It's
I believe
pretty effing vicious and violent. No spoilers for the movie, but just about everybody in the game gets messed up royally.
Oh, it's like the NFL.
Similar, but you got sticks. You got wooden sticks to hit each other with. So,
okay.
But you also see something of the future back in the past here with the Hawaiian tradition of Ioloa, sled riding. And it's most closely related to bobsledding, but instead of tracks of snow, they created paths and old lava flows constructed out of lava rock, and sledders would routinely hit speeds in excess of 80 miles an hour coming down these stone paths.
What?
And if you happen to not get it right, well, you used to look pretty. You used to be able to walk.
The course is now paved with the skin of our enemies.
Just the need for humanity to test their limits.
Test your might.
Exactly. Now, these are only a smattering of examples to show the drive within us and the tendency to violence. Over the many years, sport has tended to evolve towards safety and skill over blood. Athletes have gotten faster and stronger, but besides pushing the human body to its limits, possibly more now, there's less of a bloodthirsty aspect to it. Even staples like boxing have declined, though it has been replaced by MMA. Sports and competition is as popular as ever, but the stakes are less life and death and more dollars and cents.
I'm glad you just mixed metaphors instead of making a pun, because that's much more reasonable.
Shut up, punny human.
Oh, come on, man. You do better than that.
Says you. Now, we play things like baseball, football, other football.
Just can't do it, can you?
Soccer, fine.
There's a reason it's called soccer.
There is.
There's a history behind
no,
it.
it actually comes from the term association football, which is turned to ASOC, which is then cut down to soccer. And there's a long history of that coming from the kind of lower class into the upper class, back into the lower class, et cetera, different countries, it's a whole different thing. But yes, soccer, hockey, skateboarding, skiing, ice skating,
Pogs,
Magic
the Gathering, Fear Factor.
You're making jokes, but there is a element of we can also get into what is competition versus sport.
Fair enough.
Which that's a whole nother thing, which I don't think.
Yeah, it's an existential thing, really.
But some of that can be found in science fiction, namely in film, that has explored the future of sports quite often. It's something that comes up again and again throughout the years of science fiction filmmaking. The interesting finding there is that the constant tendencies of these sports in the future that we are seeing are tendencies to violence, death, and constantly pushing the envelope. There's a near universal temptation to explore these future cultures through their sports and find them wanting, obsessed with blood, obsessed with death, and obsessed with the extreme, taking what they think is the cutting edge and going forward into the horizon. Now, you can essentially break these down into a few different sections of sport. So one section of sports in the future is what I like to call the deadliest game, and that is to hunt man.
And Ice Cube.
And Ice Cube's no man.
He's a relentless machine.
Usually these are a battle against a fascist state or corporate tyranny. Some big examples would be like Running Man, a dystopian United States, and the Games Network broadcast criminals and political dissidents in a hunting humans contest against armed and themed pro wrestler-like stalkers. Now, these are big for betting, and the contestants make more money the longer they stay alive. But the whole idea of this is placating the masses and turning criminal punishment into sports entertainment for everyone else.
Mm-hmm. It's bread and circuses.
For anyone who might not know, what is bread and circuses?
Okay, so bread and circuses concept comes from ancient Rome, where all you need to do to remain in power is provide the masses entertainment where they get to project whatever anger or displeasure they have onto something else, then they won't revolt. They're easily ruled. Running Man is the capitalist dystopia, where the combination of money and government is the worst possible combination you can have. Basically, big corporations run the government, and so political dissidents are essentially framed as villains in the media and then sentenced to the game and then hunted down for sport on live television.
Yeah, you don't think about how the country's falling apart or how bad things are because you get to watch people murdered for your pleasure live on TV. This is something that happens again and again in sci-fi films. Stuff like The New Gladiators, a Fulci joint where TV networks plot to score global ratings, and they pit condemned murderers against each other in primetime's bloodbaths known as the Thrill Kill. And this is much more like Roman gladiatorial games, but with lots of chrome and motorcycles and ridiculousness that.
Awesome.
Similar would be a death sport. Again, this is a post-apocalyptic wasteland as range guide warriors are forced to compete upon being convicted of the death penalty. They're created to test out the death machines, essentially motorcycles with laser guns attached, and they must race and kill opponents with lasers, with draws being settled by duels with special swords called whistlers.
I don't know if you need swords if you already have lasers. You got into a Krull situation where it seems like overkill.
I think
you're trying
it's kind of like if you can't beat each other with lasers, then a much more intimate final duel is necessary. That's why you bring out the whistlers. Again, that was a Roger Corman vehicle.
Ooh.
A lot of these come from stuff like The 10th Victim, also known as The Most Dangerous Game.
How many movies are called that?
Quite a few. This one's pretty cool, at least sounding. The Big Hunt is a televised competition pitting assassins against each other. The game is broken up into 10 rounds, with contestants taking turns to both hunt and be hunted. And if you survive all 10 rounds, you get $1 million.
Whoa.
I know.
And it's important to remember that, well, it's not important, but for anybody who's a film snob out there, it stars Cello Mastroianni, who is the lead character, one of the Fellini's go-to guys, kind of like, Tim Burton's Johnny Depp, where he was the main lead in 8.5.
La Dolce Vita.
That's true. And then later on, a really great reprise to his role in 8.5 when the actors playing elderly actors come back for one more hurrah called Ginger and Fred, where it's meta commentary on the death of the Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers era of song and dance. It's a good movie, too. And also, Ursula Andress is on there, too, a Bond girl. But Elsa Martinelli actually looks a lot like Diana Rigg, who's a Bond girl, and that's really weird.
Huh.
Things to make you go,
A special part of 10th Victim is that the contestants are sponsored by corporations. That particular aspect of our dystopian now and then. I'll run through a few others of these. Series 7, essentially, people are televised as they hunt each other. The Prize of Peril, which is another hunted by a group of killers. for a bloodthirsty audience. And then I think you get to things that veer away. They're at the tail edge of sport. And these would be like Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. But essentially, the Thunderdome is used to settle disputes as two men enter and they duel to the death with different weapons that are hanging around said Thunderdome, while the group of the townsfolk, they gather around and watch these two men for sport.
So two men enter, but how many leave?
Usually one. I think that tends to be
There could be only one.
I think a similar thing would be the games in Escape from New York and Escape from LA. Again, that is someone who has been captured and must perform a sport-like trial to win their freedom, essentially. And the first one, Escape from New York, it's kind of a wrestling gladiator experience where he's like in a ring and he had like spiked bats and trash can lids. And he's going against a big professional wrestler looking guy.
Right, this is the same premise you get in Conan the Barbarian and in Thor Ragnarok, which was taken from the comic World War Hulk. And actually, that was taken from an old DC comic with where Superman was a gladiator Superman on Warworld.
Which is actually happening right now in Action Comics.
Again? They're doing it again? Whatever. All right.
Yeah. I mean, the gladiator concept, it's money. It's always been money. Watching two men fight to the death. It's
the premise of like half of all martial arts movies.
Yeah, it's the incessant need for bloodlust and
well, but it's just the idea of being dropped as like an outsider being dropped into a gladiatorial thing, either by choice or by blindsided by it to win your freedom. That's a big trope. Just that alone. Because gladiator fights, that's different. But like the idea that an out of the realm person gets dropped into this world, that's its own like subgenre, I feel like.
Yeah. You know, say the movie Gladiator, where both him and the person who owns him are essentially like winning enough fights to win their freedom. So there's still that element there. In Escape from LA, instead of fighting a gladiator fight, he has to shoot basketball.
Yes, he scores a certain amount of points.
So many points in so many seconds. I think partially this is...
Which is physically impossible.
It's impossible. John Carpenter's a huge basketball fan, so I think that's why he threw this in here.
So, another example of why you could be a big geek and like sports.
Yeah,
Hey, Prince was a huge Vikings fan, for Christ's sake. And loved basketball.
Yeah. Sports are for everybody, even if you don't want it to be.
It's true. Here's our big thing, just as a side note. We enjoy sports and all the narratives that we create around sports, what we project onto sports. What we don't like is sports culture. The Little League dads at Golden Corral, the sports bar, frat guy culture. We're not into that. And those are the people that picked on us when we were young. We're much better than as human beings and left them in the dust. But that's the thing, that if you don't understand why we're doing this, there is a difference between liking sports and liking sports culture.
Yes, it doesn't always have to be toxic.
Right, exactly.
Once you get past the death matches and the gladiatorial games, you get to something else that's kind of right on the cusp of sport. I kind of don't really think it is, and I will call this the Battle Royale Hunger Games category. So, Hunger Games, some people view this as sport. I don't think it's sport. You have people who are plucked from different areas, forced to battle to the death, essentially inhumane misery forced upon the poor, often due to a fascist state crushing will. In both Hunger Games, people watch, but they don't try to revel in the violence, usually. I think in the upper crust areas of the world, they probably do a bit. It's not sport that's played for sport. It is a life and death struggle to get to the end. And then utilize that as a catapult to overthrow this oppressive government.
Well, the sport is designed specifically to keep the oppressive government in power. It's the premise behind bread and circuses. It's the idea that you distract them, you hold them down, and you force them to root for a representative from their district. Well, in the case of Hunger Games, at least, they get certain perks if they win, and it's also pride. So basically, like, they're trying to instill into you that you should take pride in your station, even though it's not fair that you're in that station. It works as a fear tool, where we put the fear of God into everybody. And they can play it off by saying, like, oh, this is egalitarian. Everybody's got a fair shot at this, which A, is not true, and B, it's murdering each other. And normally, the only ones who ever win are the ones who have the most money and the most influence and the most training and resources. So it works as a double-edged sword as far as that goes. It both is supposed to inspire the lower classes while keeping them stratified, but also scare the shit out of lower classes and keeping them stratified.
I think Battle Royale doesn't work as much as a sport. A, because it doesn't appear to be televised. People don't know what happens. They just know that this thing does happen. All these children die, and then one winner comes out.
That's more of a personal thing. Like, I was just an asshole. Isn't that the whole idea, was that this is the way he thinks that discipline should go?
Oh, no, at least no, in the book, and I believe the movie, although I find the book to be much more entertaining and enjoyable.
Sure.
It is essentially a way to thin out society and population control.
There's a lot easier ways to do that.
This is a very sadistic means of doing it. And it also strikes the fear of the godly state into the hearts of everyone.
Well, only if the outside world knows you're going to get taken to that situation. If they don't, then what fear do you have? You know what
apparently,
I mean?
people do know that this competition of death does occur. You just don't get to see it. Winner comes out. He has won the death game, the battle royale, as it were.
Interesting.
But I'm not cheering for my favorite murderer. I'm not watching them.
Well, that's kind of the opposite of the Hunger Games. Interesting.
Yeah.
And Running Man.
Yes. Yeah. The thing that they share, it's different because us, the audience, are watching all of these people kill these other people, but there is an actual narrative audience within Running Man, Hunger Games, Series 7, these other things, as opposed to Battle Royale, where it isn't a big media event. They're just allowing kids to kill other kids.
Seems more personal. Where would you put, I think, isn't Squid Game a different example of that? Like, the audience is a rich private elites, but it's the same idea. It goes specifically to the wealthy, not public, but still viewed
well, I mean,
by
in the same
wealthy
way, like
who pay for
in
it.
Battle Royale, you have Headmaster who's watching it all, and the government sees it all, but it's not going out to the masses, per se.
But in Squid Game, it doesn't go out to the masses, but it only
going
goes
to
the highest bidder.
It's going to like
It's the capitalist
their
dream,
Illuminati who puts these competitions, on for their own enjoyment.
Right. So, but I think that's a different subgenre of the subgenre you're talking
Yes,
about. Right?
I would agree. There are certain thematic elements that are the same, but I think we could also get into like competition versus sport with that.
Sure. Well, except for the fact that they each have to do specific tasks that involve surviving, but also achieving a goal. That's where it kind of gets blurry, the competition versus sport.
A film that straddles the line between this category and the next category would be Death Race 2000. Classic film. The whole idea of this is that the United Provinces have replaced the United States of America, and there is now a transcontinental road race that people watch. And during this race, not only are you trying to get from point A to point B faster than everybody, but you gain points by murdering the civilians around you. Again, another brutal gladiatorial game to appease the people because everybody's watching these races. Now, it is just athletes who are choosing to do this, essentially, in the original. Be they Jared Carradine's Frankenstein, Sylvester Stallone. I don't remember who else is in that, but there are other people. In the remake, though, they inject criminals are then forced to compete for this road race.
Kind of makes more sense.
I think there's a bit more commentary going on with the original, though.
Okay, all right. I'd be willing
to. In the remake, cars are stripped down, everything's gray and brown, and there's a guy who's just trying to, like, survive, and he's been set up, and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, it's informed by Mad Max.
It's essentially Running Man meets Mad Max. That's kind of what they wanted to do.
Right.
But in the original Death Race 2000, these are, like, celebrities. It's very gaudy and pomp and circumstance and very sexy. This is the era of the fast car culture and entertainment, whether it be White Lines or Smokey and the Bandit. People were obsessed with their cars by turning both these things of excitement into murder weapons and trying to turn what would be violent tendencies into glorified spectacle. I think they're poking at the way that society is trending much more than your standard guy set up to be a criminal, must win race, must kill people, blah, blah, blah.
I think there are a couple other societal influences in that, because we Americans have the chip on their shoulder about Europe feeling more elite through most of our history. So it's like a more blue-collar American around the world in 80 days trope. But then also, I think it's playing into very, very specific commentary on movies like Cannonball Run and It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, and then later on Rat Race. You know, it's the same thing, except this one's just like the ultimate violent version, which I think is kind of commentary, because they're saying all these celebrities do it and everything, that's what the point of those movies were. You got every celebrity together.
It's an evil, exploited version of the wacky race trope.
The Hanna-Barbera one, right?
Yeah.
Yes, I think it has more to do with that than it does other sports movies.
I would agree. And I think what blends it between my personal categories of the Deadliest Game and the other one, the extreme sports, is it taking whatever's hot and exciting at the time and turning it to 11, which is something that science fiction films often do, especially in this next category, where they take the need to take current sports, often at the bleeding edge of wide acceptance, and amp it up. The future will be what is kind of hot now, and will explode that into a global interstellar dominance. Now, this kind of runs the gamut, but you have stuff like Battle Angel Alita, which is Motorball. Essentially, that's rollerbladers race around an increasingly hard, crazy track with a metal ball, trying to get it into the goal while they're competing against heavily armed cyborg gladiators. But essentially, it's Rollerblade, which was at the time that the manga was written, was brand new and really exciting. But it's taking that, all right, what about rollerblading? But let's crank it up to 11 and make it crazy and murder. Something similar to this.
Impossible. I've seen Mountain Dew commercials.
I think the Motorball and Battle Angel Alita is essentially taking Rollerball, which is kind of the classic of this category. Roller derby meets football, but with spike gloves and some motorcycles, as these athletes...
For some reason.
You know, because why not? Motorcycles are fun. These athletes are trying to win the game, but it has to have like this deadly edge. And again, what was popular at this point in time, because rollerball is 1975, so roller skating is extremely popular at the time. It's taking like what is exciting right now. Let's jump into the future. This is what's going to be the thing. Now, rollerball is interesting because it's one of the more telling versions of this and does something only the smartest of these do. Rollerball is overtly controlled by corporations, and in this, war is banned. And so Rollerball then takes the place of war for a commentary on how our society will overtly become in the near future.
This all culturally all stems out of the Cold War paranoia about the seemingly inevitable nuclear holocaust between the Soviet Union and the United States. That you'll see a lot in the examples that we show you. That's a big theme because it's society trying to rationalize how the Cold War has taken war to another level, a level we can't even possibly comprehend, because it's not what we consider traditional warfare. It's existential annihilation. And so with these future sport movies, a lot of them, they ban war, or these sports replace war, because that biologically and evolutionarily, that's what we do, is we replace actual competition and violence with play. But also, they crank these up to the extreme. The threat of that kind of war is to the extreme. Not only do we evolve as a species and we get better athletically as we go along, and sports evolve. I mean, if you've ever seen Olympic gymnastics from the 50s, it's basically just women planking in one-piece unitards. And that's it. You know, you get all these crazy, new stuff. And so I think it's like trying to match the existential threat that the Cold War presented on society as a whole.
Yeah, I would agree. And you see that evolving of the human form and what the spectacular of humanity, what that can be.
Dolph Lundgren.
Yes. Yeah. The Dolph is the god of future sport.
Well, yeah, I know.
I said it as fact, not as theory.
Write it down in stone.
Something could be seen like this in Starship Troopers, where they have jump ball, which essentially is
jump ball.
It's really just indoor football with jumping gymnastics added.
Yeah, it's football with more jumping.
Football with more jumping. there isn't as much deadliness going along with this, but this is also a future satire about a fascistic militaristic state. Just because they don't kill people doesn't mean they aren't training them to fight the bugs. So,
That's true. They're trying to get them to peak athletically and that sense of competition and sort of dehumanizing, or at least being neutral toward your opponent. And it's basically just like the XFL, but they're better athletes.
Yeah, there's less he hate me, I think, in this one.
No, I was going to make... Oh, fuck you. I was going to say
Is there
that.
anything else with XFL that you can say?
No, it's the only
Yeah.
thing we remember, except
That,
Vince McMahon losing his money.
Just more slutty cheerleaders, I think.
The black football.
We've got to talk about solar babies. Yeah. Anybody know about solar babies?
Raise your hands.
Okay, none of you. All right.
Jim Henson's Solar Babies. Yeah, I remember
Jim
that.
Henson Solar. Oh man, if only it was. Solar Babies is a pretty bad film. It is another post-apocalyptic wastelands, and you have these orphan kids in a prison area where their only escape is through this game of hybrid lacrosse and roller hockey.
It's like a cross between Dickens and the Mighty Ducks.
The Mighty Dickens.
Mighty Dickens. Yep, there it is.
It's a bad film. There isn't a whole lot more to say, but this is another, let's turn it up to 11 in the future.
Is that a DeLuise?
Is that a DeLuise?
Yeah, one of Dom DeLuise's kids. Is that one of Dom
And
DeLuise's
Solar
kids?
Babies? You do have Jason Patrick and Jamie Gertz,
Hey, Jamie.
who went on
Gertz,
to
alright.
do the next year Lost Boys together.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
That's
and you
true.
have Lucas Haas from the Pussy Posse.
Oh, God. Peter DeLuise, thank you very much.
Is that Dom's boy?
It's Dom's oldest boy, yeah.
Well, that's something.
Sarah Douglas? You know who Sarah Douglas is, right?
Do I know who Sarah Douglas?
She's from Superman 2.
Oh, yes. Yeah,
She's Ursa.
She doesn't show up until... So I watched this again because I hadn't seen it since I was a small child. She doesn't show up till the last 10 minutes of the film.
Sweet.
And then she plays the ultimate future bad guy of the state who is controlling water in the far future of 1986.
Amazing future year of 1986.
Similarly, we got a future sport from 1998. This is at the height of Dean Cain mania, where you have skateboarding, but essentially hoverboards, and they mix it with basketball and handball. They call it dun-dun-dun-dun-dun, future sport. Future sport.
Not even
Future
trying.
sport.
I'll just stick with current sport. Thank you very much.
I'm gonna watch the Now Games, okay?
The international now games of the present times.
That movie was kind of ahead of its time of reality TV and using fame and celebrity to push social agenda, but they do nothing with it. And
Shocker.
yeah. You know, other similar games, you had Cosmo Ball, which was a newer film from Russia that Gip saw. You said it's like
It's not
Quidditch meets soccer, but in Spaceland.
Yep. Yeah, it essentially is playing Mad Libs with dystopian tropes and then also future sport tropes. It really doesn't make any sense. I'm not saying that because anything's lost in the translation. It just didn't really make sense at all.
Yeah.
It's basically like CM meets rollerball, kind of, with Quidditch and soccer. I don't know. Even the rules of the game don't make sense, so it doesn't really matter.
All right. Loving it.
But it was a huge movie in Russia.
In Tron, you have the grid. Again, it's future sport, but, die if you play. Similar to like pod racing in episode 1. Again, it's very fast car racing, but bad things happen.
Tron is an interesting one, too, because, that's a blurry, on-the-fence competition versus sport scenario.
Yes.
They're not really willing participants. It's basically just gladiatorial events.
In the original Tron, our user gets dropped in, and he's kind of like forced to play to survive. Similar with Tron Legacy. But you have all the other programs he's playing with, and they all seem to be designed and or want to play these games.
I think it's a gray area that'd be worth discussing.
No, I could see that. Yeah, and you could get your red lines and your speed racers. And
your thin red lines.
That's a whole different thing. I could get into Real Steel, but it really doesn't have a whole lot to say, and it's not really dealing with dystopian futures, live action, big rock'em sock'em robots. the machine over man is negative.
I don't think it's even worth that. There's no real commentary going on with that at all.
No, as opposed to Arena,
Hell yeah.
which is our favorite, which if you don't know what it is fighting combats between different species on a space station arena that help to balance the ability levels of the fighter in different species. Kind of think of MMA fights in the Mos Eisley Cantina.
Like you're always hearing about.
And it has this huge selection of science fiction staple actors, especially from Deep Space Nine and Babylon 5 era.
Which is hilarious that just specifically those two, which are near parallels to each other. They're both in there. Yeah, because like, what's her name? Not Tracy Scoggins, the one before that. The one that
Claudia
was,
Christian?
And then Mark Alamo and
Armin Shimmerman.
Armin Shimmerman plays Quark.
Yeah, it's a fun film.
And then a blonde dude who's a spitting image for Christopher Reeve that really didn't do anything after that.
Nope. I mean, he did have a couple other films, but...
He really looks like Christopher Reeve, though. It's weird.
It's kind of like if they had done an amalgam film and they did like, what was it, Super Soldier?
Super Soldier?
They would have cast this guy.
That's perfect. Yes,
Yeah.
100%. That is Steve Rogers / Clark Kent.
Yep.
It's good. He looks more like Christopher Reeve than Brandon Routh does.
He does, but it's that blonde mane he's got going on. I don't think you're gonna...
It's the only reason as a kid I didn't think that was Christopher Reeve, and I was just confused.
Oh, and the lack of acting ability. Yeah, that's
And the bad movie.
Yeah.
But it's kind of a great movie, I mean, because it's super ambitious. And there are so many different aliens, even if I don't know, the costume department isn't trying very hard.
Well, they didn't have a whole lot of money, so...
No, but I mean, considering how many prosthetics and sets and all the makeup and special effects, not bad for a movie that, low a budget. And they go out of their way to set up the lore. They explain things like, okay, so how do two aliens, one who might be physically superior to the
human, they are naturally stronger, faster, fitter.
Klingons and Vulcans are the same way. So how do they fix that? Basically, they use an angular confinement beam on each component that emulates the gravity on their world so that it's an even playing field, which I don't think makes it completely even, but at least they gave it a thought.
At least they tried. It was an idea.
They tried.
Sometimes it's the thought that counts.
Because they could have just not done that. and it would have been just like every Roger Corman joint in that whole era, But no, they actually put some thought into it.
They did put thought into it. And one of those arena sets was used for robot jocks.
Yes! Also one of our favorites.
Yes, we love robot jocks. Okay, the idea of robot jocks is that there is no more war. Now there are only the games. So anytime there are any posing national considerations, people fighting over lands or resources or anything, I would love if they did like Robot Jocks, year 2022 or whatever, sequel, so we could see like more of this world. But it is the market, which is essentially America, versus
capitalism,
the Confederation, is essentially Russia.
Mm-hmm.
And they have humans who pilot giant mech robots that fight each other. And whoever wins those particular battles settle those land disputes or those resource disputes or whatever disputes between international agencies.
And they're legally binding.
Yes. Not only does everyone cheer for like their national interest per se, but the pilots are huge superstars. The idea of what everybody is cheering for. This is, again, dystopian society. You see that, like, the air is bad. There is very little access to entertainment of any kind. It's tough to find a job.
Fresh water and
food are limited. I think there's a time where, like, they celebrate. The main pilot guy goes to see his family, and they have a small block of meat cube, which they are putting in the pot to feed the family as a celebration.
More like what it used to be to live in the world. Yeah, that's the main character when he retires after losing to the evil Russian Ivan Drago character.
Well, it's not a loss.
Victor.
It's a draw.
He loses to Victor. Oh, that's right. And he retires because they were going to rematch.
Yes. Well, again, we can get into the details of this world and whatnot. People are signed on for so many contractual fights. He did 10 fights, so he's like done with it. There's a lot of underlying plot lines of corporate espionage between these different nationalities to try and figure out what new weapon is in these mech robots.
If there is one.
There is one to give each of them an advantage during these battles. There are like a eugenics program where they are growing and training these test tube conglomeration people to be the next level of humanity and fight for their different nations.
Which is weird. They're disgusted by the idea of having test tube babies. There are those today. It's called artificial insemination. It's not really a big deal.
It's not a big deal now, but this is 1989, my friend. That was brand new.
Do you think this movie in any way is commentary on the Cold War?
That's quite the stretch. I mean...
yeah, I know. I might be over my skis here. I'm just saying. No, they think they very much go out of their way to imply that there's only two superpowers left. And it's whatever became of the Soviet Union and whatever became of the United States. But the weird thing is that why are there so few of them? If it's like everybody left in the world fighting for this stuff, like why are there only like 12 people who get... It's kind of like in Pacific Rim. Like why is so few people?
See, at least Pacific Rim makes more sense because you have to have drift compatibility or whatever. You have to have a certain skill and you have to be able to drift with these people. And if you can't drift together, you can't pilot the machine. In this... There is no rhyme or reason. Anybody can just get in these machines and fight. Obviously, you want to be technically better than your opponent. But it's not like the market guy, Alexander, protagonist of this. He's just a short little Russian guy, kind of like Klaus Kinski.
That's not the market guy. That's the Russian dude.
Oh, the Confederation.
Alexander.
Sorry.
The market guy is, they're all named after Greek gods and goddesses. The market ones are.
Yeah.
Which is commentary on the space race.
Do you think there's more commentary going on here? I mean, I don't know if I buy that.
Is there any commentary? No, I think so.
No,
because
I'm
why would
kidding.
they name them specific?
Yeah.
Oh, okay,
Yes.
okay. Well, I don't know. We'd have this discussion. I don't know. We've never actually broke down Robot Jacks. We just get real drunk and go, "That's so awesome."
Yeah, but you do have to wonder why he has his own team, but you don't see them ever fighting. You don't see anybody else fighting except for our protagonist Achilles, other than when Athena, one of the Tubies, steals his robot to fight with. Are there other battles going on? They have this battle that's going on for Alaska, which they kind of set up as being one of the last big land battles. Semi-short-sighted. I mean, if you're thinking about, depends how far this is in the future, how much warfare has gone on, how much of the nations of the world have been filtered into these two allied conglomerates.
Yeah, do some real world building on that, and then I think we'd be happier.
Yeah.
Somebody should do some fan fiction.
Oh, I'm sure it's out there.
That's all slash fiction. Those are the new weapons. It's the giant dicks on those robots.
This is why Alexander and Achilles, they kiss hard.
You have to shoot right into this port right here.
Oh no, not you're in my port.
It's all about subtlety, isn't it? It's the nuances that make this show great.
This is from the mind of Joseph Haldeman and Stuart Gordon, the director. Taking it outside of just the sport aspect, there's interesting robot mech designs. The idea of the whole thing is really cool. The stop motion is clunky, but I like it.
It's got to be one of the last big stop motion movies. They didn't do a lot of stop motion after that. It was either just practical or CGI.
Some interesting factoids. Empire Pictures, that made this, went bankrupt during the filming of this, because this was its most expensive film ever. The film was bought by Epic Productions and finished and released nearly 2 full years later after it was first started and almost finished.
That makes more sense, because 89 was kind of late in the game for that kind of Cold War shit.
Yeah. There was supposed to be a sequel, having Stuart Gordon, Gary Graham, and Paul Koslow all return. And the canceled sequel would have had Achilles and Alexander team up to stop an alien invasion.
What? Actually, I want to see that more.
Imagine these guys, but it's Pacific Rim.
Oh, come on.
Haldeman wanted a dramatic, serious science fiction film, with Gordon wanted a more audience-friendly, special effects-driven action film.
I think that's one of the reasons that movie didn't work on the big stage, because they couldn't find its vision. They don't know where it fits. I mean, that's a hard nail to hit.
That's probably also the problem when you have two leading minds in science fiction fantasy kind of battling out for which one of their ideas is going to make it to the screen.
It's the kind of scenario that caused Scientology. Yeah.
Nobody wants that again. So, Robot Jocks is using sports in a completely new manner, and especially like when they use it to exemplify something bigger within society and culture. I find that one of the really fascinating aspects of Robot Jox. Mm-hmm. On a much smaller scale, and probably my personal favorite of the future sport films would be a very small film called The Blood of Heroes, also known to the wide world as Salute of the Jugger. So, starring Rutger Hauer, where it is in the far future, in this undescript post-apocalyptic wasteland, there are groups of players known as Juggers, and they play the game. The game consists of lightly armored combatants using lightly padded metal joust sticks and chains for whipping, and they have to try and either attack or protect their quicks who are fighting and winning the battle to place a dog skull on the opposing team's stake. And you have to do it in so many throws of a stone before the game ends. Have you ever seen this, Skip?
No, I have not. This is one I have not seen.
I love this film.
Okay.
This is like one of the most stripped down, just focuses on the characters and the game, not trying to like paint with broad strokes. It's very minimalistic. It's very Spartan in its approach, but it's really unique. And at least for me, I think it probably could do a little bit better getting into some of the character stuff. But this coming from the mind of David Webb Peoples. This is the only film he ever directed. You might know him as the writer of Blade Runner, Lady Hawk, Leviathan, Unforgiven, 12 Monkeys.
Some of which are great.
Yes, some of those.
Some of them aren't great.
Some of them aren't great.
It's got Joan Chen from Twin Peaks and Vincent D'Onofrio in it.
It has a young Vincent D'Onofrio.
Delroy Lindo,
Delroy Lindo in it, yes. Essentially, these contestants just show up. They start the film out just playing games. They go from what are called dog towns to dog towns. Poor wasteland towns that they win dog skulls at. You first see like one of the players get injured to the point where he can't walk anymore and gets replaced with our new protagonist. They travel from place to place playing these matches. You kind of get a sense of the world. It is this very downtrodden, dusty, Mad Maxian hellscape where there is nothing else. You try and like just scrounge enough to survive. Maybe you get to watch and or play these games. But if you do play these games, everyone is covered in these bizarre scars. They're all fucked up and marked. They are only meant for this game. Mm-hmm. Essentially, they're trying to get to the realm of the 9 cities, the last vestige of humanity and society, hundreds of layers underground. And there they have what are thought of as professionals who play the game. These juggers who are lauded for their brutality and their abilities. They are given like fine food and drink and clothes. If you can catch the eye of the nobles who are watching this game, maybe you will get to be part of that too. Again, it's just the protagonist's journey, just starting the game, getting in with Rutger's crew, and trying to go to this place and just try to hold their own. They don't believe that they can win, but they are the true underdog and are trying to survive this competition. It's very gritty, again, very stripped down. You're just kind of like, almost nobody talks throughout the whole film. There's nothing but the game, the sport, and the love of the competition and trying to find some meaning for their life through this competition. It's really cool. It's a fascinating world-building exercise that lays their world out through this game. I think it's a hidden gem. I think you should all try and find it. There isn't a whole lot to the game, but I think it does a great job of exploring hope through sport, especially when you're in a world where there's nothing left. And it also creates a sport that isn't really like any other sport you see, as opposed to like, well, what if we take rollerblades and put Spock helmets on and we try to play basketball with it? There's 2 spikes, a dog skull that's covered in like tattoos, and there's these people whipping you with chains and hitting you with these jousting sticks. It's its own unique thing. And the interesting thing about that is, at least in some parts of the world, it's become not worldwide, but an actual sport has come from this. They use like Nerf weapons essentially instead of chains and metal rods, but people actually play jugging now in the real world. It's really fascinating. I loved it when I first started as a kid, and it's like this film that nobody else seemed to know about.
I'm down. Let's check it out.
Yeah.
Go watch it.
Do it, you. And it wasn't until today I just found out that there's a longer version, The Salute of the Jugger, which is the international version that I never knew about. You can see this on Vudu for free right now, or Roku, both with ads. But I will say, if you are watching it on one of the streaming services, it is very dark. It is a poor transfer. It is hard to see.
Like 13th Warrior.
Yeah. But again, super cool. But yeah, that's a bit of future sports and movies. Do you have any future sports and TV, Skip, that you want to touch on?
Absolutely. And not just TV. I have some examples of other cross-media. But yeah, there are actually some good examples in sci-fi fantasy television as well. There are probably many that we're going to miss because I'm pretty sure there were some sports vaguely shown in, Buck Rogers. I know the Ronald Moore reboot of Battlestar Galactica had a sport called Pyramid, which was like their national pastime. It was essentially a combination of basketball and handball. Well, I don't want to give any spoilers because it's a good show. But you have some random stuff. If anybody remembers the show Sliders.
I do.
Well, there's one episode where they go to a world where instead of athletic prowess being celebrated, it's intellectual prowess. And so scientists and the great thinkers are the ones heralded as cultural heroes instead of athletes. They have billboards that say, just think it, or Einstein wore khakis, because there's a professional sport called Mind Game.
Ooh.
Spent a lot of time on that one, which essentially is Othello, the game, but you have to answer trivia questions while performing the athletic feat at the same time. You can take the ball and score a point, but if you don't answer the question correctly, you still get it wrong and you're docked points, that kind of thing. So you have to get both. It's like super layered with that kind of difficulty. That's a really challenging sport. Trivia is hard enough on its own. I mean, I can't imagine also having to do physical exertion at the same time. I mean, there are countless examples, but as with most television science fiction, you might as well just go back to Star Trek and see what's going on there, because it's always going to be something. And Star Trek does actually tackle sports way more than you would think it does. In Star Trek, you have established current sports, human sports, like ice hockey, baseball, even though baseball is a big arc because with the time that Deep Space Nine was written, who really talks about baseball, it was written right before the big home run contest between Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa.
Mm-hmm.
After all the steroid stuff and after a lot of black eyes that Major League Baseball suffered at the strike in '94, baseball was dying. It was maybe that was a sport that honestly was on the chopping block in America, which is unthinkable, but it was. Like, we're talking about contracting teams and, reducing the league and all that stuff because it was about to go bankrupt. But then they started encouraging everybody to juice up and then cork the bats or whatever. But, in that era they wrote where even though Captain Benjamin Sisko is a fan of baseball, it's a dead sport. The last World Series, which happened in the mid 21st century, there were only 300 people in attendance. And then it just kind of faded off into the distance, like the XFL. So along with that, you give tennis. Captain Archer from Enterprise. He was a water polo player. I think he went to, I want to say, Stanford. He played it in college. I remember that. And then also in Enterprise, they showed people playing basketball. And then later on, they talk about the World Cup. Obviously, soccer/football is still going. On DS9, Miles O'Brien and Julian Bashir got Quark to put in a dartboard, which wasn't fair considering, you'll see. And then, of course, volleyball does exist. They show that in an episode of Voyager called Warlord. So those are the ball-centered sports that exist today, but then also exist in Star Trek. And of course, there are fictional ones as well. I'm trying not to count tabletop games like Dom Jot, which is like billiards or snooker. or Tongo or Dabo. Those are just gambling. It's like poker and roulette. But when it comes to physical sports, they have one of the most famous and often quoted ones is a sport called Parisi's Squares, where everybody gets hurt doing, and they've never shown us once what it's like and what happens. But it seems totally badass because little kids are not allowed to play, and you always break your arm or whatever. I know, it's crazy. The game involves the use of an implement called an ion mallet, which is awesome. So for Warhammer 40K, and that's pretty awesome. And then and a ramp they have to climb, and then they all wear special padded uniforms. It's in an episode to which they refer to this. It's Will Riker goes to sickbay, he goes to Beverly, and she lectures him to, quote, "Stop playing Parisi Squares as if you're 21. Further advising him that one day you'll break your neck and I won't be able to heal that as easily." So apparently it's an awesome sport, but it's apparently very, very dangerous. And then, of course, there's Spring Ball, which is a sport played by the Bajorans. It's very similar to Pyramid. And considering Ronald Moore worked on both of those shows, I don't think that's a coincidence. So apparently he really likes handball. Of course, racquetball, another human sport, is played. It's in the plot of at least 2 episodes of DS9, and tennis is the subject of an episode in Next Generation, and then one in DS9 as well. Now, there's also, and we have to debate whether this is competition or sport, but there are martial arts that are exhibited in Star Trek as well. I'm not going to count the gladiatorial combat of Gamesters of Triskelion because that's just it's the same thing as what we were talking about earlier. But 40 Quatloos on the newcomer. but then in an early TNG episode, they have this new sport that looks exactly like American Gladiators called Enbo Jitsu, which is a fictitious Japanese sport where they have the giant mallets, like they're like staffs with a weight on one end and like a bludgeon thing on the other. It's exactly the stuff they used in American Gladiators.
Well, they're coming out at the same time.
Yeah, well, yes, they probably took them from their set. And it's essentially kendo or other martial arts that use weapons to push people out of the ring or whatever. It's the same thing, essentially, except you're on bigger platforms and you try to knock each other off, just like American Gladiators. Just watch American Gladiators, you get it. It's the exact same thing, except they have more padding.
The name of the sport is probably derived from Japanese an, darkness, bow, and staff, and jutsu, technique, the martial art of staff combat in darkness.
Oh, wait, that's right, because they put their visors down. Oh, I forgot about that part. So they're doing it blind. That's a Star Wars kind of send-up, too. Yeah, so it's basically blind American Gladiators. But then when they turn on those tennis ball shooters, woo! Then they also have one called Sunkatsu, which is similar to kickboxing and some Japanese sports. It's in a Voyager episode, and apparently it happens in the Delta Quadrant, but it sounds Japanese. And then, of course, Captain Picard is an infamously good fencer, as is Hikaru Sulu, who showed his fencing techniques in the episode of the original series, The Naked Now. Or no, I'm sorry, The Naked Time. Naked Now is the Next Generation sequel to that. And it was fabulous. Because he just ran around with his shirt off, pointing his sword at people, all sweaty, and it's pretty great.
It is good, yeah.
It's him being as fabulous as he possibly can be. It's amazing. I know they talk about sports in Space Above and Beyond. There's a passing reference to Michael Jordan's 110-point game, which sadly never happened. But
that never happened?
It was all supposed to be like, hey, Wilt Chamberlain, you suck. Your numbers are bullshit. I'm sure there's something in Babylon 5. There's stuff all over. I
don't remember anything.
I don't remember either, but there's something. Basically, anything with a long-term narrative, they're going to have a sports episode. They just are.
I mean, because it's a part of culture,
Yeah. You don't have to be a jock or a meathead to understand or appreciate sports. Sometimes it's about just appreciating numbers that change every day. Sometimes you just like looking up statistics. Sometimes you like the narrative of good versus evil. Sometimes you just want to root for your clan or your, hometown or whatever. I was thinking of Battlestar Galactica last episode when he talks about...
So say we all. So say we all.
So say we all. Now, the Pyramid Player...
This has all happened before, and it will happen again.
The one was a Cylon. Now, he gives that whole speech about how, he's giving an interview about the beauty and symmetry of the perfect shot. The most satisfying thing in the universe to him was the perfect shot. The one where you, out of instinct, hit the deep three-pointer or whatever. Anders?
Sure.
Yeah, he's the Pyramid Player who turned Freedom Fighter and then turned out to be a Cylon.
Maybe.
Yeah.
We can't guarantee that if you haven't seen the show. Maybe he is, maybe isn't. We don't know. Maybe you'll need to see and watch it and find out on your own.
But yeah, I mean, that's kind of the idea, is that for all of you out there who are interested in geeky stuff, you don't have to like sports, but you'd also don't not have to like sports. You can like whatever you want. It takes all kinds. And the people that picked on you or made you feel bad, if that's the scenario, or your father or your uncle or whatever it is, those are the idiots that we all hate and make everything bad.
Yeah, just imagine them having to play death sport. They can be a new gladiator.
There's plenty out there, depending on what dimension you're living in, which timeline, planet. There are plenty of options for you to go and explore. Like, Jake and I are both hardcore comic book nerdy kids, and we both played sports.
We like current sports that are still safe, relatively, and we can get behind. But we also like the future sport, where the expression of this dystopian reality that is impending upon all of us will lead to the extreme element of death and dismemberment.
Woohoo! Oh, I forgot, in one episode of Voyager, they talk about how Chakotay's a boxer. I forgot about that.
Thanks for throwing that in.
Stupid,
we wouldn't have gotten by without
montage.
that. That's our podcast about future sports and their necessity to both be extreme and violent, and speak about the society that is impending and how poor it is.
Almost always it's a reflection on the current time.
I'd buy that for $1.
Crickets. All right. Yeah, that's much like sports. So, there are tons of stuff we didn't cover. I mean, there's tons of sports in novels and comic books.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I guarantee you there's like several different choose your own adventure books, for instance, that have sports in them.
You know, the Arctic baseball game in space with the vampire.
Mm-hmm.
That's a choose your own adventure.
You have to play a naked Arctic baseball game with a space vampire.
We just call him Uncle Lou.
And my coach is an alien.
And my teacher's a goblin or whatever.
And I live in a boxcar.
Anyway, well, thank you all for listening to this latest podcast.
We're stupid.
We are quite stupid. Hopefully that is pleasing to you in some form or fashion. If not, we're sorry for what you just endured. If you didn't hate it too much, if you wouldn't mind liking, sharing, subscribing, maybe rate us 5 sports balls in your pod app thing of choice.
Play ball!
Yeah.
It's time to call it. We're counting down. It's time for that turnaround jumper. At the buzzer. You blew it.
I was in Fuego at the time. Sorry.
You were Prince Charles, twirling into the air.
Gip, take us out.
Well, we'd like to thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, for tuning in. Please remember to pay your tabs. Make sure to clean up after yourselves to some sort of reasonable degree. Don't forget to support your local comic shops and retailers. And from Dispatch Ajax, we would like to say, Godspeed, fair wizards.
Please, go away.